All right, you ready?
I'm good.
Hey, everybody. This is Dave. That's Bob. Say hi, Bob.
Ahoy!
Okay. So that's an every time thing now?
I apparently have my thing now.
That's great. Congratulations. We're going to talk about Picard episode 3, season 3. You know, normally people say it the other way around, but not on this podcast.
That's right.
We start with the episode.
Episode 3, season 3.
It's called 17 Seconds. We know why. So, back when I worked at Polygon, I did for True Detective seasons 2 and 3. I wrote these big, long stories. I mean, that were basically the TV equivalent of video game walkthroughs, and I called them watch-throughs. You see that clever name that I made up there?
Nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And as I was watching, like trying to figure out what we were going to do with Picard, I thought, oh, I already have an answer. I invented an answer years ago. And my answer is, it's a watch through. That's what we're doing. You, me, and everybody listening, which just means we go through the episode, probably scene by scene, hopefully not in excruciating detail, and just talk about what is happening and why we liked it or didn't like it. Does that make sense?
It does.
You want to do that?
Let's do it.
All right. So pre-credits, the episode starts. It kind of starts with reaction shots from people on the bridge, like we talked about in our first episode. And I thought, oh, that's not so bad. So where do we leave off, and where does this begin? The bad guys are chasing them, and they're no match for them. And they went into the nebula.
Right.
And I think like the whole pre-credits scene is about sort of setting up the rules of nebula warfare. Like you can't warp, just warp engine damage. The deeper you go in, the worse it is. But the only reasonable option is to go deeper.
I believe that's correct. It's similar to the Star Trek 2 rules of Nebula, I suppose.
That's not so secretly what I was hoping for the entire time, which is, can we just kind of can we pretend that starships are submarines? And then we do that sort of warfare?
It's also similar to the Best of Both Worlds. Part 1, the Enterprise D was hiding out from the Borg cube for a while in the nebula, and that allowed, for Picard to, for the characters to have sort of moments of introspection. There's a scene where Picard is talking to Guinan about, is this the end of humanity? And that's similar to how this episode goes. And also, interestingly, that I believe was the log entry that was playing in episode 1, scene 1 of this season, wasn't it?
It's from Best of Both Worlds, isn't it?
Yeah, where he said, I think he's literally saying, Captain's log, the Enterprise is still hidden within the nebula.
Oh. Maybe she was playing that to remind herself, like, because she was near the nebula. Maybe she thought she'd go hide in it, and they wound up doing that anyway. Then there's a bar scene. It's Guinan's bar, isn't it, from season 2?
That, I believe it's the 10 forward in Los Angeles, from season 2 and the beginning of this season.
It's one of the things I caught in the title sequence. Did you see that? Where I think there's a holiday, like, I think it references...
You mean the closing credits?
Yes. Sorry, not the title sequence, closing credits.
Get it right.
My bad. I think that it might answer the question. I think there's a reference to a holodeck bar scene. So presumably they're there drinking bourbon, as you said you maybe didn't love last episode. But they do. I enjoyed the Picard speech that went on too long, like they're poking fun at Picard's speeches there.
Yeah, so it's interesting being a Star Trek fan, and when your brain suddenly goes, oh, why didn't I think of that? Or is this sort of a logical extension of what we know about the TNG universe, which is they're sitting in that 10 forward bar, and then my brain goes, okay, there's a bunch going on here. For one thing, they look de-aged, and I'm sure we're going to touch on that. The other thing I'm thinking is, all right, the closing credits refers to this bar, and it has something about, computer load the holodeck sequence for Guinan's bar in Los Angeles. And I thought, well, we've never really thought about this before, but if the holodeck can produce sort of realistic 3-dimensional images, why couldn't people meet in the holodeck like they're meeting in an AOL chat room or something?
They could.
Right? So that's possibly what that was, right?
I'm not even sure it makes any sense, but yeah.
Well, I think it makes brilliant sense. It's like, well, why don't we go for a drink and you go to your holodeck and I'll go to my holodeck.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I see what you mean. Yeah.
And it'll be like we're at the bar that we both like, but you're on you're on the Titan in the Beta Quadrant, and Picard's in France or whatever. But no, we're suddenly in Guinan's bar. However, then I thought, well, how necessary is that when there's also instantaneous travel probably anywhere around the globe? Unless Riker is on a ship somewhere and say Picard is on Earth.
Wherever Riker is, he's not near Troy, who makes her first appearance. And also, like, this is a holdover from season 2, but it makes no sense for Guinan to have had, I'm going to be nitpicky here, to have had a bar called 10 Forward in the 20th century. Because the 10 Forward is the name of the place on the Enterprise D, right? Am I wrong about that?
Well, Dave, yeah, well, you're wrong about many things, and once again, you're wrong, because not only does every good Star Trek fan know that, yes, 10 Forward was the bar on the Enterprise D, but every real Star Trek fan knows you couldn't fit a bar there.
Oh, no.
According to Andrew Probert's original designs for the Galaxy class.
He got it wrong.
It just... No.
He got it wrong.
Andrew Probert got it right, and the producers in season 2 just said, I don't care, Andrew Probert. We're putting a bar right there. And he's like, it's too thin. It's just a big... It was supposed to be just a big, long, sort of elliptical walkway that's dark, and there'll be chairs kind of like at Mogg Library at Youngstown State University where you just sort of look out.
That's good. Now everybody can understand it. Perfect.
Now everybody knows. And so not only am I a purist about... why are you naming this bar 10 Forward? I don't even think 10 Forward should be there.
Wow.
Period.
Wow. So you just rip it all down.
Yeah.
Great.
Burn it all down.
Yeah. I thought Picard was, I am not going back to check it, but I also feel like Picard was surprised to find Guinan's bar in season 2 in present day Los Angeles. But if that's true, how are they meeting in the well-known Guinan's well-known 20th century bar? It doesn't. What it feels like to me is they had a set that they didn't have to build.
Yeah.
And they could save a lot of money by putting those guys there, which is fine, but I'm not sure I can square that circle.
Well, wait a minute. So let's clarify here for a minute, because season 1 and 2 are just a horrible nightmare that sort of run together.
Yep.
Guinan has a bar in the 25th century called 10 Forward, correct?
Correct. Right.
And that's where there's a little bit of that in season 2, but also that's where Picard and Riker meet in the real life, as far as we know, in season 3, episode 1.
They meet in that bar
to start their Butch and Sundance caper.
However long ago, right? Because there is the de-aging, which I thought was okay. Like Riker doesn't have white hair, and Picard has less wrinkles. So it's clear, and obviously the birth of the son happened, who knows? Or no, daughter? I don't know. The birth of the child happened many years ago.
I think it's the son.
I'm spilling so many words to say this just didn't happen. This didn't happen yesterday. Although that's a thing. I think it's 3 for 3 episodes at this point. Do I have this right? Like, there's the teaser, like 4 or 5 minute, then the very small Picard
opening titles. It's very brief,
very quick, and then they do some amount of time ago, and that's a brief scene. And then they come to the present. So it's sort of I'd say at this point, that's the formula, right? And the equivalent of that is, here's the thing that happened, I guess, years ago in this episode that relates to the
we'll have a thematic
that are happening, right?
Connection.
It's basically it's basically one dad talking at the time, and then of course
2 dads. What are you talking about?
My 2 Dads, the show from the 80s.
You know, my parents would not let me watch that show.
I know. Your sister told me.
It was just not the kind of lifestyle that they were comfortable with.
You know what annoyed me? The only thing I think that annoyed me about that scene slightly was when Riker says, "Oh shit." Listen. Here's the deal. I don't want to be. I don't want to sound nuts.
Pops
on the internet. But here's the deal. I think that people swear in real life. I swear in real life more than I'd probably like to swear if I stopped and think about it. But the thing about Star Trek is people don't swear. But the thing about new Star Trek is everybody swears. And that's one of those things I was talking about last episode where, or you know what, maybe the better frame of reference is your way of saying like this exists in a slightly different universe than before.
Absolutely. And we could certainly hold this for Bob's Curmudgeon Corner if we can come up with, maybe we can workshop a title for that segment. But yes, I totally agree. I'm very conflicted about certain elements of this new series.
Yeah, we can talk about the lighting in starships at some point too. But specifically in this scene, Riker says, "Oh shit," and it is a natural human reaction. It's just not a very Star Trek human thing to do. I'm not writing an angry letter to the people at Paramount, but there are moments where I'm like, that doesn't, I feel like they're breaking the rules, I guess is the way to say it.
Yeah, yes, I agree. I always enjoyed that Star Trek was it seemed to me to be a family show, and I do not by any means mean that to say that it's a children's show, but it was just always, when I was growing up, the kind of entertainment that everybody could watch together and get something out of it. And now this is a little more R-rated / hard PG-13 rating, whereas I think TN, I mean, Christ, Star Trek the Motion Picture was G, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, that was back in the era where, what was the thing? I mean, post that, and in the movies, the raciest it got was not double damn it. What is it? Double jackass. A double
dumbass on you.
Double dumbass on you, right? Like that was edgy Star Trek content. And I know it's goofy. I know it's silly. I know it's old fashioned. But that was Star Trek. But the point of this scene, so at this point, I don't know, are we 10 minutes into the episode? And we've got the first scene that I think sets up the rules for like the current plot. And then this scene, I think, sets up the rules for the emotional plot, right? Which is, we're looking back knowing that both of those guys are dads. They don't both know that they're dads at that point, but, they're setting that stuff up. All right. So the next scene, we're back on the Titan. The rule is the deeper they go into the nebula, the less their equipment will work, right? But they have to go deep into the nebula to try and hide from the bad guys with the bigger, better ship.
Exactly.
And so they literally send people to look out windows to look for the bad guy's ship. So there's a man and a woman, and they're looking out the windows, and the one guy goes, "No visuals of the Shrike." And he almost winks and nods at the camera at that point.
It's a little bit of mansplaining.
They're definitely telegraphing that he's a jerk and that you shouldn't like him.
Yes.
And then I'm like, is this the guy? I wonder. I'm not going back to look at the moment again. But
you are correct with what you're about to suggest, yes.
Is he the guy from the bar in episode 1?
No, he's the guy...
Or the guy in the hallway in episode 1?
Yes, he's when Picard and Riker board the Titan and they meet Seven of Nine, and they pan by, the camera sort of lingers on him for a moment, and the Siskel and Ebert rule always is...
Yeah.
If the camera's lingering, there's a reason.
I enjoyed when it was lingering that he had Star Trek shaped triangle sideburns. I don't know if you noticed that.
I did not notice that, but that would have made me love season 3 even more. There's a moment before they're looking out the window, which I thought that you would have enjoyed, which is Shaw makes the two people at the con and the helm, or the helm and navigation, or whatever the two stations are that are usually in front of the captain's chair. He says, "You guys haven't slept in X amount of hours.
36.
You guys need to go." Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was great because you guys always laughed on Babylon 5. Somebody said that every episode.
Did they really?
Every single episode was like, "Chief, you haven't gotten sleep in 3 days. Dr. Franklin, you haven't gotten any sleep in 17 days.
No, the only thing
I just need my stims."
That's good. Dr. Franklin was on a walkabout, you see.
Yes, with stims.
Yeah, so and then there's more about the energy signal. There's that bald Vulcan science officer lady who gives a big hint, the first of 2, I think, in this episode, that there's an energy signal from the nebula that is both electrical and biological. So whatever, we're teasing whatever's in the middle of this nebula, but that is clearly not it's not a nebula, but it's not really a nebula.
See, I totally missed that because and I will tell you why I missed it, because I was staring at this woman trying to figure out, is she a Vulcan or is she a Romulan? Because the makeup seemed a little severe.
Ooh, you might be right. I'm assuming Vulcan.
So first I thought, well, maybe she's a Vulcan because the sort of post-TNG style has been that the Romulans look a little more just angry to you. Don't think of what's his name from Star Trek, the Star Trek. But she does start referencing logic when she's speaking, and then I said, okay, she's supposed to be a Vulcan and not a Romulan.
Right, the way she acts, and also she's a science officer. It wasn't clear. So the way I watched this, just for you and everybody else, the dozen of people who will listen to this, is I watched it and took some brief notes.
Yeah.
And then I watched it again and took some detailed notes. And this stuck out to me like, it's funny because you're a writer and you sit down to make the episodes and you're clearly dropping hints, but then the episode just sort of washes over people. And even I was trying to pay extra special attention, and this, it didn't fly by me the first time, but their second reference to that certainly did. So I don't know what the deal is, but they're telling us that there's something in the middle and that it's not just a nebula and that it's biological. Don't know what that means, but I'll bet you we wind up finding out. Mark my words. Seven's tinkering with something in the quarters, LaForge. So the first time I saw that scene where they dismissed the security, where Captain Shaw dismissed the people, I was like, why? You taught me that Siskel and Ebert rule 25 years ago. The rule was, in my mind, you can't waste time.
Exactly.
You can waste all the time you want with people's thoughts and feelings that go nowhere in a novel. In a TV show or a movie, you really can't. That's how, when you saw Seven, I guess, spoiler alert for Seven, and the guy in the corridor takes the picture of the cops, and you told me in, I don't know, 1997, oh, I know that's the killer because I know the rules of movie making, right?
Just to go a little deeper, I think where I learned the rule was in Roger Ebert's written review of The Hunt for Red October, where he referenced the cook. He said, spoiler,
oh, yeah.
Can we get like...
Maybe we should just, I don't know, I feel like I want to do The Hunt for Red October at some
definitely.
point.
Of course we'll do that.
But I guess you can't. Do you have to say spoiler every time you're going to do something?
No,
is there statute of limitations or whatever?
Well, no, but B, I think that we need something like a spoiler klaxon or a spoiler V'ger horn or like a spoiler. Yeah. Which, by the way, okay, well, I'll save it. But yeah, so the cook in The Hunt for Red October was the saboteur, correct?
Yeah.
Or not the saboteur. Well, there wasn't a saboteur, but there was a guy working against the captain.
Yes, there was a person who had no business being in the movie because he was such a minor character who wound up, but he wasn't, as it turns out, a minor character.
Yeah.
Seven tinkers with some stuff in her quarters. LaForge, who was kicked off the bridge, checks in on her. So you connect that scene to this scene. She calls her Commander Seven, which is nice because, again, Shaw doesn't wants to use her human name, not her ex-Borg name. And then Beverly is in medical bay and the ship's doctor is rude to her. For shame.
Now, you are not as familiar, I think, with the post-TNG shows as I am, and I am not incredibly familiar. I was in the throes of my Babylon 5 love affair when DS9 was happening, and there's the whole, is DS9 a ripoff of Babylon 5, blah, blah, blah. But I still enjoyed Deep Space Nine. It was not appointment television for me back in the 90s, but if it was on, I would certainly sit there and watch it. Do you recognize the alien race of the Doctor?
No, I have no idea.
I believe it's a Trill, which, remember Dax on DS9? Mm-hmm. It was a race, I think, that was originally introduced in TNG. It's the race where... it's a sort of symbiont life form where the humanoid person with the sort of dots takes on a creature inside and sort of becomes... sort of I don't know what the word is, like a amalgamation of both of them.
Yeah.
But then that creature inside lives longer and will be passed on from like host to host as it. Yeah. That's, I believe, what that Doctor is.
And I don't know if it's the human or the host, but they're rude.
Yes.
Next up is the scene between Picard and Beverly Crusher. I think, like, from a writer's perspective, this difficulty is off the charts, because what you have to do is explain why Beverly Crusher did what she did, which is keep the child a secret from the father for 20 years. And frankly, this explanation had better be wildly good, because what she did was wildly bad.
Yeah.
And so if it's anything less than wildly good, it'll ring hollow. So Jonathan Frakes directed this. The first thing I noticed about the scene that I liked just how it was staged, which is long, wide shot, and they are very distant from each other on the extreme ends of the shot, which I think does a lot of the heavy lifting at the very beginning.
That there's like a great sort of visual space between them, you mean?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Like they didn't come back hugging. They stood very far apart from each other. And like Picard's body language is, I think he may have crossed both his arms and his legs as he leans up against the table. And there's, I don't know, 1 or 2 tables between them. I think it's saying visually there's a lot of distance between them and they need to come together. That kind of stuff's interesting in filmmaking for me. I just saw they were doing Red Letter Media did a video recently about some movie I think that was terrible, but they used Back to the Future as an example of a scene where it's just people talking in exposition. And essentially what will happen is, after 3 or 4 or 5 lines of dialogue, one character will move to the back. Person who is standing will sit. And it's a way to make something that is conceptually boring interesting.
Yes, Mike referred to it as blocking and business.
There you go.
Or business and blocking. So you move, you do something, you move, you do something. You come in, you put the kettle on, you sit down, the other person stands up and walks to the fridge. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if that was top of mind exactly when I was listening to this, but it was certainly on my mind, where I thought, like, they had to figure, like, somebody wrote this scene, and I don't know if they gave those directions, but obviously there was care into, like, they didn't just walk in and shake hands or hug and then have a discussion. They walked in and the staging was very much maybe literally standoffish.
Yeah.
Picard's pissed. I would be pissed. He says, Beverly, you made the choice for me. You don't get to condemn people before the fact. And I thought that's sort of the crux of the argument there. I enjoy Picard's righteous anger. He has that old Picard that I talked about in our first episode, Diplomat Picard. He also has angry barking Picard. And this fits in with angry barking Picard. It's recognizable to me.
Yeah, definitely.
And he's actually also sad, right? His whole thing was like, well, if I'd have known what could have been, what might I have been, a father, a husband, like, I think it's a fair argument. He didn't get the chance. And then Beverly defends her actions, and her thing is, oh, you know what? I'll quote her. She says, as a mother, your whole being is about protecting your child. I knew I could protect mine. I didn't know if I could protect yours. And I think there's logic in that, right? Because they go through a back and forth about, well, she goes, I was going to tell you, but then this thing happened, and then this thing happened, and then this thing happened. And he was like, oh, so I had a 9-day window or something like that. And she's like, no, your whole life is that. I think it's the best they could do. I did. It's, she lost a husband. She lost a son. They just broken up. Picard said he didn't want children. He was married to the stars, whatever.
I think this is one of the dangers of taking a story and stretching it perhaps a little too thinly.
Okay.
So they're basically playing the hits, and I'm not to say that's a bad thing, but this is essentially the same scene between Kirk and Carol Marcus in Star Trek II, and that is, that's obviously a 90-minute movie or a 2-hour movie or whatever, and that the scene in Star Trek II is so economical, and it's so beautifully written. It's very few lines of dialogue. She basically says, were we together? Were we going to be? Something about, you had your world and I had mine, and I wanted him in mine. It's basically the same conversation, just much quicker.
I said this was a difficult scene. I wouldn't say it was an A+, but yeah. I don't think they failed. And there's a thing to talk about. I always feel weird when big things happen off screen. Now, I recognize that you can't put characters necessarily into stasis, right? It had been 20 years in real world time since there was any canonical story about Dr. Crusher, right? They decided that things happened in those 20 years that I guess also, it mirrors the same amount of time in Picard, right?
Yeah.
But it always feels weird to me. I'll give you maybe 2 examples of that. The first and strongest one was when I went to see episode 1. Now, put all of your thoughts and feelings about episode 1 aside.
Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Yes, I should say that again. It's funny because now when we say episode 1, we could be referring to Picard. But May 19th, 1999, this is huge for all of us, all of our friend group. We're there at midnight. We're ready to see the show. And the lights dim, and I get this not fully sour feeling in my stomach, but I had never considered myself uneasy about this movie. But I thought the feeling that came over me was strong enough that I remember it now. And that feeling was, I knew all of Star Wars. Like all of canonical Star Wars I had watched many, many times, and now that's all going to change in some way, shape, or form. And I felt, I guess, somewhat uneasy, somewhat weird about that. It's adding more chapters to a book you read years ago. And you thought you knew it. You could get your arms around it. I felt that way to a lesser extent, about that second Matrix movie. But I only remember that because it was the second time I felt it. And what that created in me was this sort of, wow, that's weird that happened off screen. Like, you can't tell the whole story of what Dr. Crusher did. That's insane.
Yeah.
Right? You have to say these people did things. But this is a remarkable thing, right? And if you decide on doing the remarkable thing, you've got to be able to justify it, right? And I think it's logical to assume that the justification came after the idea.
You know, something funny about the scene, now that I'm thinking back on it, is when they start to get attacked or the ship starts rocking, the set starts to lighten up a little bit.
It's beautiful.
And I was like, oh, there's actual lights there. All right, nice.
Yeah, then there's a scene with Riker and Kid Crusher. I continue to like older, smiling, slightly more carefree Riker. Jack gets a lot of side-eye from the crew. They address the accent thing, which I think makes no sense, but again, it's about the best anyone could do. If you go to school in London, you pick up a British accent.
Yeah.
Sure. Whatever. This is I think this might be the most impactful part of the whole episode because I have a foreshadowing here. I have kind of a tough time navigating Picard in this episode post this scene, although this does seem to be the fulcrum because it turns out that Jack knew about Picard and decided not to meet Picard, which is an awful thing for Beverly to reveal. But when Picard leaves, that conversation, when he leaves sickbay and proceeds to the bridge for most of the rest of the episode, the diplomat I was praising last episode is the guy who's like fire, 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 attack, 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 attack. And you have to be able to go like, in my mind, how did he go from that guy last episode to this guy this episode? Like, this is the big thing for me.
I suppose the answer is that they're coming after the son he just discovered that he has.
Mm-hmm. Well, the son who rejected him, by the way, now. It's not just that, but it's the knowledge that the son doesn't want anything to do about him. He walks out of there and says, "Will, walk with me," and barely even glances over to Jack. And he says, he calls it irreparable? It doesn't matter. Like, all that matters is I screwed up. I got to get this crew to safety.
Yeah.
And like at this point, Riker's the guy. I mean, you can see how they're fitting these puzzle pieces together, right? Riker's the guy who lost a kid, according to Picard season 2. And, they go over that in this one. And he plays the part of encouraging Picard to repair whatever damage there is with Jack because, that's his kid. And that's on Riker's mind. I wish I had more time with a kid.
Yeah.
And Picard lost the kid because Beverly took him from him. And then Beverly says, "Oh, and by the way, the kid rejected a relationship with you." Jack says at some point, it's probably not a throwaway line, but when he was talking to Riker, he says, like, his life experience is that whenever he meets a legend, they're a disappointment. I don't know what legends he's talking about. Apparently he's met legends, but I know that's about Picard.
Yeah.
I don't know. What was these two scenes? Did they strike you as good, bad?
Generally, I found this episode to be, as I said earlier, just one of those episodes where I'm assuming they sort of broke down the season and then said, okay, what has to happen in this episode? And several major plot points have to be revealed. But other than that, it's mostly scenes of two people having heart-to-heart conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it struck me as a bit meandering and a bit just sort of spinning their wheels for a runtime to me.
I think that's not unfair. Or maybe the way to say it is, I think that's fair reading. Because what we're doing here is, this episode is what happens between when they can't leave the nebula and when they get sucked into the nebula.
Exactly.
And so, like, the Shrike is doing exactly what they said they would do, which is, well, we're just going to pick up, like, you can't win, and we're just going to pick off at you until you surrender or whatever. And to skip to the end, like, the Shrike disables the Titan and then just turns around and leaves.
Yeah.
Like, it's exactly what was supposed to happen. The captain gets hurt. They transfer command. I really like the shots of I like the space battles in this, which I think are very TNG, which is like a couple of shots at a time. Like nothing huge and bombastic and 4 trillion things getting shot off, Discovery or like J.J. Abrams Trek style.
Yeah, it's funny. I've watched a few episodes of TNG lately, and it did strike me that a lot of those space battles or moments where there's conflict between the Enterprise D and ships in space, sometimes they're almost very much like a BBC series from the 70s. There's a lot of explaining what's happening, but you don't see much of it. The special effects are very are very economical, and there'll be a lot of Worf say, Picard will give Worf an order. Worf, you'll see Worf hit a button, you will hear the button sound effect, and then Worf will tell Picard what happened, rather than seeing what's happened. So I definitely do like that, where it's not necessarily the sort of Discovery overload or the Star Trek Beyond overload of, 17 effect shots and 500 objects on screen and lasers flying everywhere.
Right. So now we get to Rafi and Worf. Rafi is a holdover from earlier seasons of Picard. I think she's fine. I don't think she's great. I think she has to play somewhat manic, and sometimes she's good at that, and sometimes she isn't. I think Michael Dorn's looking pretty good. But this is another example of something, like, I am not a Worf expert. I did not watch much of Deep Space Nine at all. The last time I saw Worf was in, I guess, Nemesis, and he was acting like Worf, but something happened, once again, off screen, which is not illegal, but it's definitely like Worf as guy who is working on myself. He's off, and they've got some explaining to do.
Well, with Worf, I'm the slayer of Galron, and I'm the, from the house of this and the clan of that, and I have made some herbal tea.
It's Whedon-esque. And would you like some herbal tea?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
I think that humor works great when it works. I think that, again, there's a high degree of difficulty for it.
So Worf, to some extent, was always a bit of comic relief, but it was always because he was acting so Worf-like. I'm trying to think of a moment where Worf would just be very brief and very blunt. Perfect example. There's an episode on Deep Space Nine where I think it's Cisco's trying to get them to understand the ancient human game of baseball. So they're all on a baseball team in the holodeck or holosuite or whatever, and he's trying to get them all fired up, and they're all trying, and Worf just goes, "Death to the opposition," and that's just funny. Because he would say, a Klingon who sort of understands human culture would say that.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, you're right, it does come off a little more Whedon-esque or like, Marvel-esque, where he's deliberately being, what's the word? This sort of deliberate juxtaposition between, warrior speak and sort of, cutesy, I just made some tea. Yeah.
Worf and Rafi, This is the part where they learn about, or this is the scene in which they learn about Titus Ricca, who is a human who paid off the dead Ferengi from last episode. That guy was the actor, was the lead character in 12 Monkeys, by the way.
Ah, interesting.
And so the scene ends when they decide that they're going to find this Titus Ricca together. And then we're back on the Titan, where Picard, post that conversation, is super aggressive. And he thinks that the Titan should be aggressive because the Shrike can't see him. But we know, having watched the episode, that the Shrike can see him. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, Riker overrules him, and it's defensive strategy only. And the first time I watched this, I was like, yes, I want it to be, I don't want a big battle. I just want them to play a game of cat and mouse, Hunt for Red October style. Like I was super into it. And what Riker says is that he tells Picard that a Titan isn't the Enterprise, by way of saying, like, it's not as powerful a ship, I guess, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But they're like their conversation ends, and it's like they're slightly frustrated with each other. There's a scene next where Jack Crusher is actually nice to a patient in sickbay, which I thought was a pretty good insert here, because he spent the entire episode or the entire series kind of being a jerk, even understandably being a jerk. But now there's a scene where they're like, oh, he's kind to a person and cares for the sick. Like, they're expanding his character in part so he's not one-dimensional, but he's also going to do things. And you have to believe, I think, if he has any credibility, that he's not just the rogue.
Yeah, yeah. What was that exchange about?
They cut to him in sickbay, and he was reassuring somebody who was wounded.
Yeah, I suppose he's got a little bit of history with this, helping his mother. Just sort of dealing with patients, dealing with war zones, things like that.
Yep. They're not just saying that, they're showing that this is how we acted.
Yeah.
You know, they told first, and now they're showing. The other thing that happens in this scene is that the Captain Shaw's bleeding internally, but the arrogant doctor who doesn't want Beverly's help gets it anyway, and Beverly winds up being right about it, so a little vindication there. Jack apologizes to the captain, which is what, by the way, Picard wanted to do earlier. And then he looks at the trail of blood, which there's been at least, I think, 2 shots in this scene so far about a trail of blood in the middle of sickbay, which they probably would have cleaned up if they didn't need it for the plot.
Well, I mean, if you're actively being shot at,
Sure.
I assume they will eventually clean up the blood, but, you know, they got pretty important things going on.
That's fair enough.
Yeah,
I was like, but I didn't get I thought at first it was symbolism, but it turns out the blood, they have a very clear shot of Jack looking at the blood after talking to Shaw, and it turns out that the blood reminds him of gives him a plan, right?
Yeah.
Then this is the second time at least that the bald lady Vulcan science officer says she's reading electrical and biological signatures. She calls it an anomaly, but like this is clearly sort of V'ger vibes mixed with Borg vibes. I don't know, something like that. But she says it's never been recorded by Starfleet, which I guess means it's neither.
You know, now that you say that, that is incredibly interesting. I hadn't really thought of the V'ger angle. However, every time they have that V'ger sound effect, that blaster beam or whatever that cue is that reminds you of V'ger and TMP, yeah, you know, it's funny. Why would they be doing that? Is it just a simple callback?
A little bit of everything.
But wait, but now they're saying that the nebula is like biological?
Yes, it's biological, and she's reading biological and electrical. No, the way she says it is she's reading electrical and biological signals. So electrical is expected, biological is not. So there is someone or someones in the middle is what I'm reading from this. But the practical point of this is do not go deeper into the nebula, which is why Riker makes the decision to get out of the nebula, which is not a nebula, but also not just a nebula.
So now we have theories about the conspiracy aliens, the Borg, another Deep Space Nine villain we'll get to, and V'ger.
Yep.
Yeah, fascinating. Wonder where. Literally, I have no idea at this point where all this is going.
Either do I, which is how I like it. I should just probably take this as an opportunity to say we'll talk more about it later. I am fine speculating based on a close watching of the episodes. I just don't want to go out and find more stuff out. You know what I mean? Jack tries to get on the bridge, and there's a security guard who denies him. And I was slightly upset that he wasn't wearing an old-timey Starfleet football uniform like in the motion picture. But that
with the armor.
Yes, right. It doesn't make any. It was it's such a weird move. We're going to talk about the motion picture at some point.
Of course.
But that sets Jack off on a path to 7. And while he's doing that, we get to the part where they debut the portal weapon. I did not realize at first that the portal weapon is the same weapon that they used at the end of episode 1 to kill all of the Starfleet Academy people.
Recruitment building or whatever.
The 117 people. It was not immediately obvious to me, but I worked it out eventually.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you know what else is funny now that we've talked about V'ger, the Borg, and all these things? People are also saying this ship, what is it, the Shrike?
Yes.
Is that what you call it? It's even got a little touch of the Vorlon about it, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Those sort of 4 prongs, and then it generates that little energy field in the front.
I love design that just tells you. I'm intellectualizing this in a way that I don't. I love that maybe I shouldn't. I love the design because the design just says this is a super bad guy ship. Like, it's aggressive. It's got its arms out. Its arms aren't like, arms. They're just pointy. It's like, that's what I like, not to, with apologies for mixing franchises. Like, maybe the best piece of design in any of the Star Wars sequels is Kylo Ren's mask to me, because I just thought, that's instantly, like, I'm sure people spent an infinite amount of time trying to figure it out, but when they got there, it was like, oh wow, how do you create the successor of Vader's mask? Oh, exactly like that to me, right? I thought it was great.
Definitely. Well, and it's funny, and in the trailer, the shots of the Shrike sort of coming through, maybe from the nebula, or like you sort of get this sort of sideway pan with the prongs coming, and it's sort of it also reminds me very much of the of Nero's ship in Star Trek: The Star Trek.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And even the shots and the way it's composed and the way they move. And another interesting thing about that ship is the bottom has sort of almost like a secondary hull thing. Huh. It looks kind of like an angry eye. It sort of has that eye shape.
Yeah.
Maybe like the eye of Sauron or something. But also, it does look a little bit like the bottom of the Enterprise D.
Kind of.
Have you thought that at all?
No.
Yeah, it looks.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're going to get a lot of story stuff from me because that's what fascinates me, because I like stories and I'm a writer. But so Riker goes, we got to get out of here. We can't go deeper, right? So we got to get out of here. And then they get out of here, and that's how they introduce the portal weapon, which is basically, it's like, try to escape and we will just use our weapon to put you in front of us so that we can do what we told you was going to happen in the second episode. You're going to lose. We're going to pick you off, right? But the portal weapon is narratively a setup for why they just can't leave the nebula, right? It answers the question, well, why not just warp out? Well, they can't.
Yeah, and it seems like it takes an awful long time to charge up. And I've seen a million episodes of Star Trek where they just say punch it and they're able to get out of there. It does kind of make you wonder, can't you just hit the button and go? Like, what are you doing?
Right, which is why I started writing down the rules at the beginning, which is, how they have to establish narratively that they cannot leave the nebula. So what plausible rules are they going to create so that you go like, okay, I get it, right? So they say I'm telling you, watch the first 4 minutes of the episode and it is basically rules disguised as a scene, right? You can't warp inside of it. There's a bunch of warp engine damage and they can't outrun the bad guys on impulse power. If they go, the deeper they go into the nebula, the less they can see. So they're going to lose all of their sensors. And their only reasonable option at this point is to hide deeper in the nebula. But then, halfway through the episode, science officer says, it's even worse if you go deeper into the nebula. We can't just keep going deeper because at some point there's this gravity well that's going to suck us in. So they can neither leave nor stay. And then you have two options, which is try to evade, and that's Riker's position, and then try and sort of outsmart them. which is Picard's position. So at the very least, they occupy two positions, Riker and Picard. Have I said this yet? I watched the episode twice, and I took light notes the first time around, and then heavy notes the second time around. So I'm not pulling this from memory. I'm writing this stuff down. But when you watch something that closely and write it down, you're like, oh, I get it. They were doing this so they could do this, and then this so that they could do this. I can agree or disagree with any of the decisions they made, but I get it.
But at least it's sort of thought out. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's thoughtful. Right. So at this point, the portal weapon, number one, narratively, they can't, they were trying to leave the nebula. This is why they can't. So they got to go back in. That portal weapon is, like I said, totally the thing that destroyed the Starfleet Academy. 117 people. The only reason I remember that is because it's a Halo thing. John 117 is Master Chief. Don't know if it's a reference, but I keep thinking it. And it's, like I said, it's stolen technology from the Daystrom Institute, which will come back again. So they have to go back in, and Picard's like, this is why I'm saying fight while we still can, instead of waiting until they're picked off and defenseless. And Riker overrules Picard again. It starts, there is an evolution. There is an arc to this, right? Where they sit down at the beginning and Picard is magnanimous and says, you should call me number one, because Riker becomes acting captain when Shaw is incapacitated. Like I said, magnanimous is the word that comes to mind. They are there at a spirit of cooperation. And the first thing they do together is Picard, I thought it was a really clever move where they shot out the photon torpedo. Help me here. You know more about this stuff. They shot out the photon torpedo as a thing. It's a physical object, right?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question. In Star Trek 2 and 3 it is, and 6, because they put Spock's body in it and you see the thing. I'm not entirely sure.
Well, one's a laser beam and one's not, right?
It's not the phaser, yeah.
It's a missile bomb, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that is. So they shoot that out and then they fire a phaser. So they shoot out a bomb missile and they fire a laser at it so that the concussive blast makes the Shrike tumble. I thought it was one of those clever solutions. But the interesting thing about that scene is Riker doesn't even have to fully tell Picard what to do. They're sort of finishing each other's sentences at that point.
Yeah.
But that relationship, the arc of that relationship is deterioration throughout the episode, which I think is interesting. Then we are with Raffi and Worf again. Did you catch the name of the planet, Bob?
Metalis Prime.
Yeah. Who? Who's the showrunner?
Metalis. I apparently that is a callback to Enterprise. Because
really?
They refer to Metalis Prime. It was like, a hive of scum and villainy, because Metalis was someone's assistant or something on Enterprise, and the writer did that as a joke.
Oh, that's awesome.
So Metalis didn't invent it, but he's definitely calling back to it.
Nice. It is very Star Wars. What can I say?
Yeah, very Blade Runner, very Star. Yeah, this is probably the stuff that I enjoy the least. I mean, it's nice to see Worf again, definitely, and I'm glad that he'll be sucked into this sort of snowballing narrative. But these scenes remind me the most of Picard season 1 and 2, and I'm not. I just every time it cuts back there, I'm just like, here we go again. I
fully understand that the galaxy is big enough to have places like these. But the more time they spend in them, I'm on my hobby horse again, the less it feels like Star Trek, and the more it feels like other science fiction. It's not out of bounds, but I think they don't spend too much time here, I guess is the way to say it.
Yeah, it's very sort of like Star Trek, Attack of the Clones, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like Coruscant bar.
Underbelly, yeah.
Right. And yeah, I think actually these two characters paired up are working together, which is good because clearly they're spending a lot of time together. Then we go back to the Titan and...
Running.
Running?
They're running through the halls. They're running through the corridors of the Titan.
Picard is loudly voicing his opinion that everything Riker is doing is wrong. I mean, I think to be fair, he's not used to being number one, but, I could see how that would grade on Riker. They figure out at a certain point that the Shrike is tracking them, and that's when the light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, oh, the guy who turned and nodded at the camera at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's got to be that guy, right? The shady dude. And then, as it turns out, it's sabotage. Do you know the etymology of sabotage, Bob?
Japanese workers who feared their livelihoods being replaced by machines threw their wooden shoes, known as sabots, into the works, hence the term sabotage.
I don't care if that's classified as fan service. I was happy to be fan serviced. So Seven and Jack figure out, I think Seven figures it out almost instantly that it's Verterium. If that's a thing in Star Trek, I
have no idea.
Might be a reference, but they're clear about that. And then there's some punching to get Seven out of house arrest.
Which is another slight sort of, something that sort of stuck in my head. As soon as Shaw is hauled to sickbay with blood pouring out of him, the only reason Seven is in the brig, correct me wrong, is for helping Picard and Riker.
Right.
Wouldn't that be the first thing that they did? Like, Seven, please get the F back up to the bridge.
They were busy? I don't know. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Oh, there's a really good shot here of the crew running down the hallway. They get hit or something, and they fly up to the wall on our left, their right. Seven and Jack put on gas masks. They find the leak instantly. The science officer says there is an inner gravitational well that would be bad to get into. That's
deeper is danger. Yeah.
There you go. Picard, now that he knows about the sabotage, wants to use that to create a diversion, right? Because he's the guy he's the guy on offense in this episode. And Riker acknowledges, he says it makes tactical sense, but they can't risk the lives of the crew anymore. Echoing really what Picard said earlier and is kind of, I don't think Picard thinks he's endangering the life of the crew, but they're just trying to do it in opposite ways, right?
Yeah, this is what I was saying. This episode is not my favorite of the three so far, and I'm still very much looking forward to where this is going. I'm assuming it's going to be very good. But most of this seemed strange and sort of perfunctory to me. Yeah. If that's a word. I don't understand why they're arguing so much. This would not have been tolerated on the Enterprise D. There's a famous clip that always comes up in my feed on YouTube for some reason. There's some episode where Worf is for some reason acting first officer and Data is acting captain. And Data and Worf are not getting along in this relationship. Worf is just constantly, no, we should not do this, Commander Data or Captain Data, and then Data has to pull him into Picard's ready room and basically dress him down and like, listen, your job as the first officer, if you want to bring me these things in private, that's fine, but out there, your job is to execute my orders to the best of your ability. I get the idea. You can't have a series where there's no interpersonal conflict. I get that. Right. Or there has to be a way to figure out sort of how to keep with Roddenberry's ideals but still have an enjoyable television show. I think TNG did it pretty well for those 7 years. Obviously, it could definitely get kind of boring and kind of stale. Mm-hmm. But I think this is now so far turning the meter the other way that this seems incredibly out of character to me, that these two people are... I mean, I just don't buy that they would be arguing this entire time through this battle. They would figure out a way to work together.
Yeah, right. I mean, it started that way, and this is the drama that they cooked up to make it interesting. Riker has a theory about why Picard is acting this way. This is a thing that happens multiple times in this episode, where Beverly earlier told Picard that she did what she did in part because of what he said. Well, you said you didn't want a family, which I don't doubt. You said you didn't want to be like your father. Okay, fine, right. But Picard's pissed off because don't tell me, you didn't give me a choice is the point. But she's mind reading him to justify his decisions, and that obviously ticked him off. Riker goes, at this point, he says, I understand that you're amped up. You have a son on board and it's affecting, and then Picard stops him mid-sentence. So there is this sort of, I don't know, leitmotif of, I think
people sort of assuming bad intentions on the part of other people, which can be pretty, which can definitely drive someone crazy.
Yep. The Shifty guy knocks Jack out, takes off his mask. It becomes clear that Shifty is a changeling.
Yes, I fully believe that this thing was a conspiracy alien guy taken over from that episode from season 1 of TNG. That thing happened with the face, and I thought, okay, it could be a changeling. That's kind of interesting. We don't get confirmation of that until a scene or two later. But yes, it's a changeling, and that's what they called them in Deep Space Nine. That was their principal adversary in the Great Dominion War that kicked off near the end of DS9.
Yep. We get to the first of a few scenes between Worf and Raffi and Titus Ricca, I believe. There's a lot of good cop, bad cop, where Raffi is the bad cop and Worf is I guess you would say, a kinder or somewhat gentler Worf. He says there's no righteous cause, which is weirdly relativistic for Worf. Bad cop Raffi threatens. Worf appeals to, I don't know, like philosophy. He says to Ricca, your anger is your enemy. We are all the same. The fight is rarely worth dying for. That actually winds up, I think, ultimately working, not so much the screaming. We're back on the Titan. Jack's delirious. There's that scene.
Some kind of a vision.
Yeah. It's deliberately obscure, right?
It is. It's like blood vessels branching out almost.
Right. And he sees Seven, who says, I turned on subtitles for this. They do not say what she says. My best guess is she says, connect the branches. We will be together soon. The vine. And then something like Jack Darksuit, which is probably wrong. But like...
Jack Darksuit.
That's it. But why? It's pretty clear to me that this is why would he see this vision? Well, you know, we'll get to this in a minute. He wakes up and Seven takes him to sickbay. Picard runs down only after Riker tells him to go. Like, Picard kind of freezes up. He's struggling here. I think this is realistic. He's still wrapping his mind about what it means to be this person's father, and he's terrified.
Well, now this is the scene in the turbo lift,
and then Riker says, "Go."
Oh yeah, like, you're right.
Dude,
you're right.
buddy, go. Go attend to your son or whatever. And then there's that scene on the turbo lift,
which is an explicit callback to their earlier conversation in 10 Forward, correct?
17 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah. I believed for a moment that they could plausibly kill Jack, and I think that's impressive, or maybe I'm just gullible, but there was a moment where I thought, like, wouldn't it be interesting if they just wrote that character out at this point?
That would definitely be a zag when you thought they were going to zig. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Then we're back to Worf and Raffi and Titus. Raffi's yelling. Titus Ricca. Boy, if I am going back between Ricca and Rika, or I get this wrong, my apologies to everybody. Because it drives me nuts when people do that on podcasts. And I think, well, why didn't they just look it up? And then here I am, too deep to look it up at this point. So we're going with Ricca.
So sort of like totally off the beaten path here. When you gave your Shakespeare lecture,
plebeians,
was that what the word?
Was the word.
All I recall was there was a word that you said at least 17 different ways in the course of that speech.
I had never heard the word out loud, but I'd read it a million times, and I was giving a talk at a Shakespeare conference because that's who I was at one point. And I was listening to some talk right before me, and I think the way I pronounced it in my head was plebeians, and it's plebeians, although I might have that wrong.
I feel like I've heard multiple pronunciations. Basically, I just base all my pronunciation on various television programs and films, and I want to say that I have heard many different... Plebs seems to be the most common sort of insult terms, but yeah, there are many, many different ways, I think.
And so... when I was listening to somebody else use the word in something before me, I was like, oh God.
And you just sort of got up in your head.
I have to, thank God I saw this person, because now I know how to pronounce it correctly. And I remember thinking about that the entire time I was presenting, and I got off genuinely proud that I had pulled it off and pronounced it correctly the entire time. And you looked at me and you shook your head and said, I think you may have pronounced it 17 ways.
You know, it's funny. I did the same thing when I got married. My wife's name, her family, and she pronounced it as Teresa, but obviously there's a million ways it could be Teresa, it could be Teresa, and she pronounces it Teresa. And and now I'm up in my brain going, you know, you sort of have the stage fright, and you're getting married, and you're doing the vows,
yeah,
and I'm pretty sure I said Teresa, and I believe I had the exact same. I believe the deacon or the priest performing the ceremony said it one way, and I in my brain said that Rube just pronounced it wrong, so I'm going to correct him. And I think I swapped it out.
That's good. Yeah. Well done. I think that means the marriage is off.
No.
Okay, my bad. So there's a lot of yelling, but this is the important part about this scene is that there's a big tease about who the bad guys are. So I transcribed it. Titus Ricca says, like-minded souls, enemies of the Federation. Not very clear there.
Oh, wait
Rafi
a minute
says,
now.
why blame the Romulans? And Titus Ricca says, because it was never about the portal weapon. We just wanted to keep Starfleet spinning. And then Worf says, it was misdirection from the very beginning to distract us from. Rafi interrupts him. Oh my God, am I saying Raffi and Rafi?
I think you are, ways? But I am similarly confused about the pronunciation.
Oh no.
It's
I'm going to go with whatever's in my head. Rafi says something else being stolen from Daystrom. So they established earlier that the portal weapon was the thing that was stolen from the Daystrom Institute. Well, it turns out there was a second thing stolen, something more valuable, they say. And then Titus says, that's all I know, so let me go. So that's what we've got. Maybe we should put this behind speculation, but I only know, if it's something we know, I only know that there's only one thing I know that's at Daystrom based on Picard, but it could be a million other things.
All right.
This is where we find out that Titus Ricca is a changeling. Worf says, tell me how long you've been away from the Great Link. I don't know. I'm not looking it up because I don't want to know. But I don't know what the changeling mythology is, and all I know is that made me think of the vision that Jack had earlier. But why would Jack have a changeling vision?
Yeah,
that doesn't. I mean, maybe they'll make it make sense, but I don't get it.
Okay.
Then we're back on the Titan after Jack has recovered. Picard's back on the bridge and still adamant that they can't keep running. We must engage and protect this ship. And that, I think, is actually probably the best. I'm glad that Picard said that, maybe is the way to say it. This whole episode, I'm thinking, like, why does he just want to engage? The way in my mind I was parsing this was Riker is trying to be defensive. Picard's trying to be offensive, and offense means a confrontation. So Riker's more like protect, and Picard's more like punch. But at least he says here, we must engage and protect the ship. And I thought, oh, okay. So Picard still does want to protect the ship. He just thinks that engaging with the enemy is the way to do that.
Yeah, the best offense, I guess in this case, the best defense is a good offense.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now it's Picard's turn to tell Riker why Riker is feeling the way he is or acting the way he is. He says, I understand this instinct to be fearful of loss, which is clearly referring to Riker's son. Thad, who died of a silicone-based virus from earlier seasons of Picard. And Riker leans in, pissed off, and says, fearful of loss? You are out. I love angry Riker. I love when Jonathan Frakes raises his voice or gets pissed off. I really enjoy that. He says to Picard, you are out of line.
Yeah, there were those best parts in the second episode, in Best of Both Worlds Part 2, where he's basically saying that we have to ram the Borg ship. We're basically out of time. He's like, we're out of time. He really gets that sort of deep. Yeah.
It feels like the captain doing captainy things. And Picard's still basically not listening to Riker, says, we cannot allow it to make us weak. That is this instinct to be fearful of loss. And he tells him to sit down. And then Picard says, Will, how many times must your strategy fail before you change it? It's not working. And then there's the beautiful, can't unsee it, cutaway reaction to shots of the bridge crew. And then he tells them, sit down, Admiral, I'm the captain of this ship. I think that's good tension. I mean, even if you don't picture those two being angry, I sort of hate but enjoy the conflict at the same time.
Yeah.
Back in the other scene, Warp vaporizes the changeling into goo. Jack says to Seven that there's a changeling on board. Worf and Rafi discuss the Dominion. Like, Worf is like, oh, now that it's a changeling, I know about stuff. and he gives a little exposition about how he knew what was happening. He said, I was contacted by a close friend within the link, so a changeling, right? He says it's a man of honor. He informed me of this splinter group. And then, I'm not sure I fully get this, but if Starfleet were to acknowledge the existence of the splinter group of changelings, they would be reigniting the Dominion War. I know. Sure?
And you know who Worf's referring to?
Who?
Odo. He was the changeling security chief on Deep Space Nine.
Got it. At the end of this, they basically say, we got to go to Daystrom Station to figure out what's going on. And Worf and Rafi are like, official partners.
Yeah, it's nice.
Now we're back on the Titan. They can't warp. And Picard says, we fight or we die. And finally, Riker agrees. He says, fire everything we've got. And then the portal opens and they replay a scene from The Hunt for Red October where they shoot themselves. And I thought, oh, God. And then they were dead in the water.
And then, of course, Riker's final line.
Remove yourself from the bridge. You've just killed us all. I'm not joking here. The entire internet could mock me for it. My gut went sour when my friend yelled at my other friend and said that. I was sad.
Yes, as I said, I'm not a huge fan of this sort of ginned up controversy between our two friends. But that's basically the exact line. Isn't that what he says to the captain in The Hunt for Red October? What does he say? Something like, you arrogant ass, you've just killed us. Yep.
So clearly it is The Hunt for Red October. Good catch.
Nice.
And that's it. So I found myself 3 episodes in a row thinking, I don't want to wait another week again. So that's, like I said, 3 for 3. I'm with you. General reaction, I think this is the least good, although it wasn't a bad episode of the 3. And yeah, I don't think I would necessarily like this episode as much as I do if I hadn't watched it twice and taken notes. Because to me, although they drew the narrative lines and could eventually explain to me why these things happened, it wasn't obvious on first watch. And in fact, it seemed to conflict with things from even previous episodes. So it all hinges to me on Picard comes out of that conversation with Beverly changed. And that makes him want to fight.
Yeah, and I will say, now that we've gone through this and you've taken such copious notes and you were so studious, I think you have actually made me enjoy this episode slightly more.
Well, that's nice.
True.
Not my point, but like, hey, listen, when I did that watch through for season 2 of True Detective, which was not very good, and everybody sort of turned against the show, kind of understandably, I think I liked the show more than I otherwise would have because I turned it into a game, basically.
Yeah.
You want to do our speculation segment things? I'll give you the rules I came up with. So this is what I figured out back when I was doing True Detective stuff, which is the rule is basically if I figure out something from careful watching, then that's fine. Like if the show's foreshadowing and I pick up on it, I'm cool with that. Like I said, that's what I did when I wrote stuff for True Detective. And in my mind, what we were doing is an audio version of a watch through. So I don't know what they're predicting exactly. We talked about a lot of it. The nebula's not really a nebula. There's something in the middle of it. And that this entire episode was clearly about getting them to that.
You know, it's funny now, and this just sort of popped in my brain while we've been talking about this. So now we know a lot of people think it's connected to the conspiracy aliens, which originally maybe were intended to be something connected to the Borg, but then that panned out to not really happen. They keep talking about the Romulans. Now the changeling Dominion thing came out of left field for me. I was not expecting that at all. And they keep playing the V'ger sound effect, and they're in a big nebula. It's almost like there was a great the finale to season 5 of New Doctor Who was pretty cool. Moffat sort of had all the Doctor's enemies team up to try to take him down. You almost wonder, could that be a possibility?
Sure.
Is this, I mean, have we ever had like a
super group,
like a super villains team, like a super group? Yeah,
I remember that one episode of Darkwing Duck when they did that with all the bad guys. So sure,
there you go.
Maybe maybe Darkwing Duck is the inspiration here.
Yeah, it's possible.
I have Oh, you want to know the one thing I know that they that is in Daystrom comes from season 1, which is when they found B4 there. B4 being the proto data / lore.
Yes.
So I don't know.
Yes.
Lore's been a bad guy before. I imagine Lore will be back. I know. I didn't mention this last week, I guess. But I know that Brent Spiner's back. I assume he's back as an android named
How
Lore.
do you and how do you know this?
Well, because he's part of the original TNG cast. So like they didn't do everything except him.
Okay, yeah. So that was the character.
Oh, that's from last week?
Yes, Data, Lore, B4. It is interesting because I did not really realize this until recently. There are canonical explanations in TNG proper to say that Data does age. So I remember when we got to Picard, sort of in the post-Nemesis era, and then when Picard was coming up, sort of the general consensus was, well, you can't really have Data because he's going to look too old for the part.
I think Brent Spiner said that at some point.
But then you look back at the show and they explicitly say, apart from the fact that the human being Brent Spiner ages during those 7 years and then into the TNG films, they explicitly say it in the series at least once, Data does age. So there was no reason why we couldn't really have Data back. So now they've given Data his sort of grand send-off in Picard season 1. It seemed a little, Mike from Red Letter did a pretty good job of saying that it's a little schmaltzy compared to how they actually treated Data on the show. Picard was not madly in love with Data.
The premise was that they were best friends.
Yeah. And then Mike plays like a montage of 37 moments of Picard being a total dick to Data. Right. Well, and again, totally off the topic. I love it. That's why I love season 1 and 2 of TNG the most. Even though they created 10 Forward, which, as we have established, will not fit in the front of the saucer.
Shame on them.
There is this moment in season 1 where Data gets his fingers caught in one of those Chinese finger traps, and it's first of all delightful because he is totally perplexed by this Chinese finger trap, and Picard has just such utter disgust for him.
Data, what are you doing? Apologies, Captain. I seem to have reached an odd functional impasse. I am stuck.
Then get unstuck and continue with the briefing.
Having his fingers trapped in this child's game. It's so great. Please go back and find that.
Okay, I will.
But okay, so yes, Lore is still out there. Data's consciousness, as far as we know, has been downloaded into B4, correct?
Well, yeah, but they sort of hand-waved over it as like, oh, he's not the same. I would be perfectly happy if they somehow resurrected Data. I do not care.
I would go back to and I have probably seen Nemesis all the way through once in my life. I would like to go back. I believe there was some kind of distinction between Data's backup put into B4 at the end of Nemesis and what that was in Picard season 1.
That was the thing. Like, as you said last week, nobody expected Nemesis to be the last of the movies. They gave at least a tease because Data was singing Data's going to die. He downloads whatever he can into B4. At the end of the episode, I think it's a scene between Picard and B4 where B4 is singing a song that Data was singing or listening to. Like, the implication was, oh, there's hope. Data might not be gone forever.
Yeah, it's like the McCoy Spock thing in Star Trek 2-3. Yeah.
And so by the time we get to Picard season 1, they show the pieces at the Daystrom Institute when Picard visits Agnes Girardi for the first time.
Oh, yeah. Great all-time character.
Yeah. She shows him B4 in a drawer. And I can go back and take a look at it, but my recollection of that, it was just a hand wavy like, oh, we thought that was going to work and it didn't, which is a narrative way to say, don't concentrate on that. And then by the end of Picard season 1, they came up with a completely different explanation.
So you're theorizing that they possibly stole Lore from Daystrom.
Or B4.
Or I'm sorry.
I assume Lore's been out in the universe causing trouble since forever. But maybe you put Data in Lore. I don't know. Maybe you take him from B4 and put Data in Lore. Sure.
Or he's B4. Yeah, I don't know. This is going to be interesting, though. Well, I'm still looking forward to it. Look, this is much better than anything than any Star Trek to me since Nemesis and since the end of the TNG series, since DS9. It is still like I still stand by, this is a slightly parallel universe. This is not my Starfleet. My Starfleet, they are very competent, very serious about their jobs, very cool under pressure. They work together. They're all about problem solving. And that's one thing that I loved about good Star Trek, is it doesn't necessarily always have to be a villain. Star Trek 2 is great, but too many people have tried to replicate Star Trek 2, and there obviously is an element of this going on here. I'm hoping there's more to it than that, and I'm pretty sure that there is. But what was so great about Star Trek was it wasn't always about beating the bad guy. It's about how do sentient beings work together to problem solve, which is great drama, which can be great drama. I'm not a fan of the swearing. I don't like that it's not quite as family friendly. I'm not a fan of the dark lighting. I don't really like the Whedon-esque dialogue and the quipping and all of that. I'm willing to work with it here and take the show for what it is, and let's see where it goes.
I'm probably going to watch episode 4 next week.
I am. I think that's a safe assumption.
Do we want to talk about? I know you got to leave. Do I want to give you an episode of Strange New Worlds, or just want to say we're punting?
Yeah. So as I just said, I have hated all things. I especially dislike the CBS Star Trek since Discovery started. But you have been trying to get me to watch Strange New Worlds since it premiered. I did enjoy the is it Anson Mount?
Yes.
This sort of proto Enterprise, and I can't stand the constant prequels, the constant recasting. I mean, who would have thought after The Cage that we would have 2 more versions of Captain Pike
right?
in popular culture, but we do. I generally dislike all this backward navel-gazing stuff. I just want them to do what Roddenberry did with TNG, which was very bold, and maybe it was out of necessity, but like, we're just jumping 70 years and we're making a new series. We got a new Enterprise. Let's go. But that being said, you are very hot on Strange New Worlds, so tell me one episode that I should watch.
You should start with you know what? Forget it. I was going to say, I'm going to be bold. I was going to go safe. I'm going to go bold. It's the Serene Squall is the name of the episode.
Serene Squall. Okay.
That's episode 7. Now, you should watch the first episode to get introduced. I don't believe there was a bad episode of Strange New Worlds. If there was, I've forgotten it, and that's probably something in and of itself. But the Serene Squall is an episode. I said before that a lot of new Trek can be heavy-handed and almost feel like the worst of English classes I've been in, where people are just using they're just using the text as a pretext to talk about something they want to talk about anyway. You know what I mean? You're not really talking about the text at that time. I think the Serene Squall is an excellent way to talk about something, to make a point intelligently. And I think it happens on and off screen in that one. So if you want to watch just one and to talk about that at some point, I remember thinking in the middle of the episode, oh, I get what they're doing here. And actually that's pretty clever.
All right. I will make it my business to watch the Serene Squall.
Engage. Serene Squall. 3rd star on the right. To infinity